It starts with a morning that could belong to almost anyone. Jordan silences the first alarm and lies there for a moment, staring at the pale rectangle of light on the ceiling. There's a meeting on his calendar he isn't looking forward to, a bill he forgot to pay, a text from his sister he keeps meaning to answer with more than just a thumbs up. He makes the same coffee he always makes, same chipped mug, same half-listened-to news in the background. The anchor is talking about something big and far away. Jordan is thinking about whether he has enough gas to skip the station and still get to work on time. Outside, the street is waking up. Buses yawning to a stop, someone scraping frost from a windshield, a dog that really does not want to go back inside. Jordan locks the door, checks the handle twice out of habit, and steps into a day he thinks he already knows. On the drive, he hits every red light. He taps the steering wheel when his favorite song comes on, misses his highway exit because he's lost in thought, and laughs once at himself as he circles back. Later, someone will replay these moments in their mind and try to turn them into clues. The extra time at home, the missed exit, the way he hesitated at a yellow light. But right now, they're just life. At 9:12 a.m., a coworker notices Jordan's chair is empty in the meeting. At 11:47 a.m., his sister sends a second text, "You alive?" with a laughing emoji. At 3:05 p.m., a sedan that looks like Jordan's is captured on a grainy parking lot camera, pulling into a space near the edge of a strip mall. The driver's face is impossible to make out. By 9 that night, Jordan's phone is going straight to voicemail. 3 days later, a patrol officer responds to a call about an unmoved car. The sedan is still sitting in that same space, a thin layer of dust tracing the outlines of fingers that brushed the trunk, the hood, the door handles. Inside, there's a coffee receipt stamped with the date of Jordan's last morning and a jacket draped over the passenger seat like someone meant to come right back. The officer takes notes, runs the plate, and files the report. In another building, a records clerk is eating a late lunch over a keyboard that sticks on the number 3. A stack of forms waits to be entered into an aging system that crashes twice a day, like clockwork. Jordan's report goes into the pile. In a windowless room that smells like paper and toner, a case number is stamped on Jordan's file. One box is checked, adult, possible voluntary. Another box, meant for missing, endangered, is left blank. A date of birth is entered with 2 digits transposed. A status code, meant to keep the case active in the system, is mistyped by 1 number. The file lands in the wrong drawer. And for a long time, that's where Jordan lives. Not on a map, not in an evidence locker, in a drawer labeled with the wrong word, closed.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and sometimes it's a lot quieter than we expect. I'm Samnang, and this is Rise Stories, where every crime tells a story, and every story is a window into how our systems actually work, or don't.
I'm James, your co-host, unraveling the mystery one clue at a time. And yeah, today's story is not about a chase or a dramatic courtroom twist. It's about a drawer, a typo, a checked box that should have been different. It's about how a person can disappear twice, once in real life and once on paper.
Before we go any further, we want to be crystal clear about something. Jordan isn't one real person whose name we changed. Jordan is a careful composite built from several different missing adult cases where files were misfiled, miscoded, or quietly sidelined. We've stripped out identifying details, shuffled timelines, and blurred locations on purpose. Please don't try to match this story to a specific case or family. That's not the point, and that kind of speculation can really hurt people.
Right. We're not here to blame one department or one clerk. We're looking at patterns, at how overworked systems and old software and plain human error can bend a timeline just enough that a person like Jordan slips below the radar. And just as important, we're going to talk about the people on the other side of that file. The family, coworkers, the ones who keep calling and feel like no one is listening, when in reality, the system literally can't find the case it's supposed to be working on.
To help us do that, we've got someone who lives in that space between story and case file. Kevin is with us, true crime author, researcher, someone who has spent a lot of time navigating archives most of us don't even know exist. Kevin, welcome to Rise Stories.
Thanks for having me. Every crime tells a story, and this is the part of the story most people never see. It's not glamorous. It's not a dramatic interrogation scene. It's a screen that times out, a form that doesn't have quite the right checkbox, a file room where one mislabeled folder can change everything.
Let's walk back into Jordan's day and really slow it down. Because those first 24 hours, they matter. Not just in the physical world, but in the paperwork world too.
In the first hour after Jordan misses that meeting, it's an annoyance. Someone jokes that he finally took that vacation he talks about. Someone else mutters about picking up the slack. By late afternoon, the jokes have gone a little flat. A coworker sends him a quick email with a subject line that just says, "You good?" No reply. At home, Jordan's sister is scrolling through their last conversation, a meme, 2 months old, a half-finished plan to get together soon. She calls his phone, hears the familiar voicemail greeting, and doesn't leave a message because she figures she'll just try again later. It's not until the second day, when Jordan doesn't show up to work again and no one's seen his car, that a supervisor says the words that change everything. Maybe we should call someone.
And this is one of those early pressure points. For adults especially, there's a lot of hesitation before someone picks up the phone and says, "I think this person is missing." We've all heard, adults are allowed to disappear. They're allowed to take a break. So families and coworkers second-guess themselves. They wait, they rationalize. And those hours are also the hours when the first report could be filed, or not.
Right, and for the record, that whole thing of you have to wait 24 hours to report a missing person, that's more myth than rule in a lot of places now. But myths are powerful. They shape what people do.
Exactly. And when someone finally does make that call, what happens in those next 10 minutes is huge. The dispatcher is trying to get a snapshot. Who is Jordan? Any medical issues? History of leaving before? Arguments? Stress? Anything that sounds like he might have chosen to step away. If the answers sound like he's stressed, but he's an adult, he's independent, maybe he needed space, it nudges that first form toward a certain box getting checked. That's where the road forks. Voluntary or endangered. High priority or we'll keep an eye out.
And the family doesn't see that form. They just hear the tone of the person on the phone. If that tone is a little casual, a little reassuring, they might think, okay, maybe we're overreacting. Meanwhile, the case is being born on paper, already leaning in one direction.
Sam, take us inside that paperwork maze, because we talk a lot about crime scenes in true crime, but not the other crime scene, the database.
Yeah, where mystery meets reality is often in a drop-down menu. So, big picture. An officer or deputy takes an initial report, either in person or through a phone system. That might live first in a local record system. Sometimes it's a modern interface. Sometimes it looks like it hasn't been updated since dial-up. Then, depending on policy, that report should feed into state databases, and for many missing persons, into national ones as well. Each step involves codes, numeric ones for status and type of incident, letter codes for jurisdiction, boxes for things like runaway, non-custodial parent, possible voluntary disappearance. Now imagine you've got 6 reports to enter. Your software just froze on you twice, and the birth date you're trying to type in has 2 6s and 2 9s. One of those numbers gets flipped. In Jordan's composite case, that's exactly what happens in one version. The date of birth gets entered wrong by a single digit. Suddenly, the system doesn't recognize that this Jordan is the same Jordan tied to, say, a car registration or a previous address on file.
So the computer thinks, essentially,
Close, but not the same guy. And some of those automatic cross-checks and alerts never fire.
Exactly. Or take the status code. There might be one number for active missing adult, another for located, another for administrative closure. If you hit the wrong key, or if the wrong option is chosen because the officer thinks, hey, his coworker said he was stressed and talking about getting away, then the digital trail gets icy fast. The system could quietly treat Jordan's case as solved or as non-criminal, even though no one has laid eyes on him.
I've read internal memos where the language is something like, no evidence of foul play, no further investigative steps taken at this time. And when you read that next to an interview with a family member who is saying, we knew something was wrong, that gap is heartbreaking. A missing box, a wrong code, can make it look like those concerns were heard, when in reality, they were translated into, we're not too worried.
Let's talk about those labels then, because we throw around words like closed, inactive, non-criminal, but they don't always mean what the average person thinks they mean. In Jordan's story, his case winds up in a drawer marked closed. That sounds final. But in practice, those words can be a lot mushier.
Right. Closed can mean, we solved this, we know what happened. It can also mean, we ran out of leads for now. Or in some systems, it just means this is no longer on an investigator's active caseload, but the file exists. Inactive might mean, we're not currently doing anything unless something new comes in. Non-criminal can mean we don't have evidence of a crime at this moment, which is not the same thing as nothing bad happened.
And for families, those words land like a verdict. I've interviewed parents who got a letter saying their loved one's case was reclassified as non-criminal. To them, that reads as, no one believes something was done to my child. Maybe they think this is our fault or their fault. In Jordan's composite, it's even trickier because that label was partly the result of a clerical decision made early on. Once that label exists, it shapes every conversation that follows.
And I want to pause here because it's easy to jump straight to, well, someone messed up and didn't care. But we know a lot of investigators care deeply, right? They're just operating inside these boxes and codes.
Totally. Justice is a journey, not a destination. And a lot of people inside that system are walking it with very heavy backpacks. We're talking about process here, about how you can have good intentions but bad infrastructure. An officer might honestly believe they're classifying something correctly according to policy. A records clerk might never be told that one particular box affects whether a case pings in a national database. None of that makes it less devastating when you're Jordan's family and the trail goes cold on screen before it ever really heats up in real life.
So, who is Jordan beyond the boxes and codes? He's the sibling who remembers everyone's birthdays but sometimes forgets his own appointments. He's the coworker who stays late to help set up for someone else's presentation, but always leaves his own slides until the last minute. He pays his rent on time, he calls his mom on Sundays. He's not perfect, but he's consistent. The kind of person whose absence would be noticed quickly, not just because he doesn't show up, but because he doesn't respond. He's got responsibilities, a pet that needs feeding, a project at work that only he really understands, a promise to drive a friend to the airport next week. These are the threads that tether him to his life. When those threads all go slack at the same time, his family knows something is wrong. They also know he's been stressed. Money, work, the low hum of anxiety that never quite leaves. And that's the detail they hesitate over when they're talking to officers. How much do you say about someone's struggles when you're afraid those struggles will be used to explain them away?
This is where victimology, done with dignity, really matters. It's about understanding someone's routines, their risks, their patterns, without turning their life into a checklist of reasons why bad things might have happened to them. In Jordan's story, the fact that he's reliable is a big red flag when he suddenly isn't. But if all that survives in the file is adult, recent stress, might have left voluntarily, then that reliability gets lost.
I've seen cases where a single line has a history of depression or recent breakup, ends up doing a lot of work it shouldn't. It kind of whispers in the background of the file, maybe they chose this. But if you talk to the people who actually knew them, they'll say, that's part of the story, sure, but it's not the whole story, and it's not a reason to stop looking.
And that's why we're avoiding invasive details here. We're not going to list Jordan's private struggles like bullet points in a risk assessment. Behind every headline lies a chilling tale, but it's still a human being, not a plot device. What you need to know is this. By the time his family makes it absolutely clear that this is not like him, the file already leans toward non-criminal, possibly voluntary. And that leaning affects what happens when they call back, and call back, and call back.
Weeks pass. Jordan's sister starts keeping a notebook. Every time she calls, she writes down the date, the time, the name of the person she spoke to if she can catch it. Little details. He said they'll flag the car again. She said case is still open. They told me to check hospitals. The words are meant to be reassuring. On paper, the case exists. But on a different screen, in a different office, the status line next to Jordan's name says something else entirely.
I've heard so many versions of that notebook. Different names, different cities, same pattern. And what's brutal is that the family is essentially building their own parallel case file, trying to make sense of answers that sometimes don't line up with reality because the underlying record is wrong. They think they're pushing against indifference. Sometimes they're actually pushing against a typo.
And to be fair, if you're the person on the other end of that phone, you might be looking at a screen that says closed or non-criminal and honestly believe you're giving accurate information. You don't see the moment 3 months ago when a code got flipped from active to administrative.
Families versus the file is really what this episode could have been called. Because once a certain version of the story is locked into the system, it's heavy. Changing it takes work, and sometimes someone willing to say, wait, this doesn't make sense. But that moment often comes late, if at all.
In Jordan's case, the moment doesn't come for years. The file sits in that wrong drawer under that wrong label while birthdays come and go. His sister switches to a new notebook, then another. The pages get less detailed over time, not because she stops caring, but because there is only so many times you can write, they said they'll call if anything changes. Then, one day, something does change. Not in Jordan's world. No new tip, no mysterious phone call. In the records room.
This is the part that sounds almost boring on paper, but it's huge. An audit, or a software upgrade, or a newly assigned detective doing a review of old missing person entries. Kevin, you've seen this from the research side. What does it actually look like when somebody stumbles across the error?
Sometimes it's as simple as a spreadsheet. You've got a list of missing adults, a list of closed non-criminal cases, and someone notices that the same name appears in 2 places, or that a case marked as closed doesn't have any narrative explaining why. Other times, a new detective or analyst is told, go through these old files and see if anything jumps out. And they're the first person in years to read the whole story, start to finish, instead of just looking at the top line. With a composite like Jordan, that moment might be Someone opens a file, sees located as the status, and then realizes there's no documentation of him actually being found. No hospital record, no voluntary contact, no follow-up report. That's when the stomach drop happens. You realize the system has been telling one story, and the evidence tells another.
And once that's discovered, there's this awkward but necessary question. How do you tell the family? Imagine calling Jordan's sister after years and saying, essentially, "We found a mistake. Your brother's case should never have been treated as closed the way it was." There's relief because someone is finally paying attention. And there's anger because why now? Why not when it could have made more of a difference?
Yeah, that cocktail of emotions is rough. Hope, grief all over again, and this sense that the clock got turned back, but only on paper. Time in the real world kept moving.
I've had families describe it as being told their loved one went missing twice. Once when they disappeared, and once when the file did. When the error is finally found, it doesn't magically produce answers, but it can reopen doors that were quietly sealed by a keystroke. It can prompt new searches, new interviews, new database checks that should have happened years earlier.
So what does better look like? Because sitting in the dark saying, "Wow, that's awful," doesn't help Jordan or anyone like him. From an investigative side, regular audits are a big one. Having someone whose actual job is to look for weird gaps, cases that say closed without a clear reason, entries that don't quite line up with other data. Essentially, treating the database itself like a scene that needs to be examined.
Standardized coding helps too. When every agency is improvising what inactive means or using different numbers for the same thing, it's a recipe for confusion. Clear, shared definitions of what it means to mark a missing adult as voluntary, as endangered, as non-criminal, that can prevent a lot of these silent dead ends.
And then there's transparency. Not in the sense of dumping confidential files online, but being honest with families about what those labels really mean. Instead of just saying, "The case is inactive," saying, "Here's what we've done, here's what we can still do, here's what this status actually changes in our workflow." That kind of clarity can't fix everything, but it gives families a more accurate picture of what's happening behind the scenes.
Cross-checks between databases is another concrete piece. If a missing person entry doesn't connect to vehicle records, hospital admissions, unidentified remains databases, that's a missed opportunity. Some departments are starting to use tools that automatically flag those gaps. It's not glamorous, it's code cleanup. But like we said, the past holds the key to the present. Sometimes that key is literally hidden in a field that never got filled out.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and thinking, I'm not a detective, I'm not an IT director, what can I actually do? There are ways to support better record keeping and support families without diving into amateur sleuth territory.
One big one is supporting advocacy groups that focus on missing persons and data transparency. A lot of them push for policy changes like mandatory audits, better training on missing adults, and standardized forms. Even simple things like sharing their verified resources instead of speculative threads can shift the culture toward evidence-based conversations.
If you're in a position to ask informed questions, maybe at a town hall, maybe in a local election context, you can focus on processes, not individual cases. Things like, what systems do we use to track missing adult reports? How often are those systems audited? Do families get clear explanations of case status labels? Those questions are boring in the best way. They're the kinds of questions that prevent a file like Jordan's from wandering into the wrong drawer.
And when you share stories like this one online, keep it ethical. No wild speculation about real cases, no trying to decode which composite elements might match which town. Behind every file number is a family reading those comments. Share thoughtful reflections instead about systems, about how we value people on the margins of the database.
Jordan's story, as we've told it, doesn't end with a dramatic discovery. There's no single clue in a dusty box that solves everything, no taped confession, no final answer that wraps his life in a neat conclusion. What we do have is a file finally pulled from the wrong drawer, a status field corrected, a note added, reopened for review after internal audit. For Jordan's family, that note is not closure. It's acknowledgement, a small, overdue admission that something went wrong, not just out there in the world, but in the way his disappearance was recorded.
When I think about cases like this, I come back to one assumption I hope people reconsider. That if something isn't showing up on a screen, it isn't being ignored. Screens can be wrong. Files can wander. What we see in a database is not the whole truth. And treating it as gospel can miss the human standing in front of us saying, "This isn't right."
For me, it's the idea that the system is either this all-knowing machine or this cartoon villain. Most of the time, it's neither. It's duct-taped software, overloaded staff, and processes that were designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't excuse the harm. But if we want better outcomes, we have to care about the boring details, forms, codes, audits, because they decide who gets found and who gets filed away.
I'll add this. We tend to picture justice as this big dramatic moment, a verdict, a confession, a breaking news alert. But justice is also the unglamorous work of keeping good records, listening when the data doesn't match what families are saying, and admitting when a box got checked wrong. In the pursuit of truth, we find justice in those tiny corrections. They don't fix the past, but they can change what happens next. If Jordan's story made you think differently about the hidden life of a case file, we'd love for you to stay with us on this journey. Subscribe to Rise Stories wherever you're listening right now so you don't miss future episodes. And if this episode resonated, rating and reviewing the show genuinely helps other listeners who care about ethical, victim-centered true crime find us.
You can also share your reflections. No speculation, just thoughts, using our hashtag. Tell us what assumptions you're rethinking about missing persons and the systems that are supposed to protect them. We do read those, and they help shape the kinds of cases and issues we cover.
And if you're someone with a loved one missing, or you've walked even a piece of the road we talked about today, we see you. We're not here with easy answers, but with a commitment to telling these stories in a way that honors the people at the center of them.
To the real but unnamed people whose experiences helped shape Jordan, the families who kept calling, the investigators who kept looking even when the system made it harder, and the ones still waiting for answers, we hold space for you tonight. Cold cases, clear voices. Together, we rise.